Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the Necrons, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a dive into the most powerful builds available to them. And I've wanted to discuss the Necrons for a couple weeks now, but with their recent LVO victory, I felt like I needed to put a video out on it, kind of discussing the main strengths of the Necrons and why they're such a problem for the Aeldari. Now, full disclosure, this is not going to be a complete how to defeat Necrons video. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks until the data slate comes out for that. For balance purposes, I don't know exactly what's going to change, and therefore I kind of want to save that video until after that's all said and done. And that way we have a better idea of, what units are going to be effective against the Necrons, etc. But what I can tell you is the Eldar are definitely going to be in the slate to be nerfed, and, possibly Necrons in a more minor way as well. And not just because of their LVO victory, the Necrons are doing well in the tournament scene in general. So don't be surprised if you see some Necron nerfs. I know that does seem a little bit weird coming from an Eldar player to say that, seeing as we've been sitting above 55% for the entire edition so far. However, we are going to get nerfed, and the next big boys up to bat are going to be the Necrons. I guarantee it, if some things aren't changed, which we'll talk about in the video as well, briefly. I don't think that many things need to get nerfed. I just think a few interactions need to be, toned down just a little bit. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at in today's video? So we're going to, first of all, be looking at what the Necron Canoptek court is. Again, if I mispronounce that, I apologize. I don't know how to pronounce half the words in 40K, so you're just going to have to cut me some slack on that one. We're going to be looking at what competitive Canoptek court builds will likely include, so all the units that they will take. We're going to be also asking the big question, which is why the Canoptek courts and the Necrons in general are giving the meta Eldar builds a lot of problems. And lastly, how to deal with the Canoptek court and the Necrons as the Eldar. So what is the Canoptek court? Well, the Canoptek court is a Necron detachment focusing on Canoptek units. That is Wraiths, Scarabs, Crypteks, Doomstalkers, and Reanimators. And the rules for this detachment are extremely powerful. First of all, the whole detachment gets reroll hit rolls of 1 permanently. So that is pretty strong as is. Then on top of that, while they're in the power matrix, models reroll all hit rolls. So what is the power matrix? So essentially this detachment gets bonuses if they control a majority of the objectives in any part of the battlefield. Their friendly deployment zone is always considered within their power matrix. And if you control half or more of the objectives in no man's land or the enemy's deployment zone, you are also considered within the matrix. And because Necrons are pretty much considered one of the better factions at controlling primary objectives, this is something that is often going to be in effect for them. On top of a super powerful detachment bonus, they also have some great stratagems and, of course, enhancements. So the key ones you're going to have to look out for are the Contemporal Shift. So that is 1 command point and basically makes the unit unable to be shot at by models more than 12 inches away. So basically gives it a slightly better lone op. Lone op prevents units from, outside of 12 from firing, which means if you have one model within range of the lone op, then your whole unit gets to shoot at it. However, the Necron one is a per model basis. So if you have one model within range of that Necron unit, only one model can actually shoot. So that makes an already durable army even more durable if they can just shut off shooting from one unit a turn. Also, they have reactive subroutines, which allows a Necron unit to make a normal 6-inch move if an opponent comes within 9 inches. This is kind of like a reactive Phantasm. It's very strong, especially for an army that doesn't normally have access to these types of movement shenanigans. And as you will come to see, the Necron Codex was very blessed with a lot of movement-based and, teleportation kind of shenanigans. They also have the Dimensional Sanctum, which grants the user's unit infiltrate, yet even more mobility on a very durable army. So typically this is going to be on a Cryptek. Well, I think it has to be on a Cryptek actually. And that Cryptek is probably going to join a large unit of Wraiths. So you have infiltrating rates, which obviously is very powerful because they are a durable unit in addition to being extremely fast. You also have the Hyperphase Fulcrum, which gives the unit a reroll to wound of 1 while in the power matrix. So this is a pretty good one. I think it's just basically something you just take just because you're going to always pretty much be in your power matrix. So rerolls of 1s to wound, it's pretty good. At least in the early game when you move up to the objectives and you're pretty much uncontested. Now, what will the Canoptek Court builds likely include? So basically all of the builds include pretty much the same stuff, which is they include maximum units of rates. So Canoptek rates are extremely durable. They don't have the best damage in the world because they hit on 4+, but again, they're getting those rerolls from the power matrix and they're getting a 5+ feel no pain from the Technomancers, making them even more durable. And of course, the Technomancers can take those enhancements that I spoke of earlier. You'll also see a couple of immortal units of 10 with Tesla and the Plasmancer for a 5+ sustained hit. So normally Tesla gives you a sustained 2 on 6s, but the Plasmancer allows it to be on 5+. And this is an insane amount of auto hits, but more importantly, it's really strong area denial because that Overwatch is going to be hitting extremely hard. Every 5+ is going to be 2 automatic hits in addition to the initial hit, which is extremely powerful. Now, it used to be a lot stronger, but GW recently nerfed it, so it's not doing like crazy 13 or 14 mortal wounds a turn anymore. Unfortunately, it's not going to be able to proc devastating wounds via that stratagem because, they are actually not Canoptek units. They are, just regular Necron Immortals, so they don't get that ability. Which is good. I think I'm glad they nerfed that at least because, if that was in play, I think there'd be a lot more Necrons in the top 16, let's just put it that way. Canoptek Scarab Swarms will also be in the list for secondaries and OC reduction. They're also not bad at trying to, kind of tie stuff up and be a general nuisance. They have 4 wounds apiece at 40 points for 3. So they're pretty cheap and, they're just there for basically to be an action monkey and to distract. They do have a significant amount of attacks with lethal hits, but they hit on a 5+ normally, so they do something. They're there, but, don't expect them to survive long because they don't really have much in the way of saves. I think they have a 6+ save and toughness 2, if I'm not mistaken. So they basically die pretty easily to any kind of bolter fire or equivalent. Lastly, you will see Doomstalkers. They are great anti-large and Terminator equivalent killers. They have a massive weapon that deals D6 + 1 hits, with blast. They have the heavy special rule, and of course, strength 14, AP -3, I believe, and damage 3. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered the basic units that you might see in the Canoptek Court, why is the Canoptek Court and Necrons in general giving the meta Eldar builds so many problems? So first off, let's start at the obvious. The rates are very resistant, especially with all the different, stratagems and stuff that you can use on them, to Night Spinners. And in general, Necrons are extremely resilient to the Night Spinners debuff because they could just teleport, right? There's a lot of special rules in the Necron Codex that just allows them to teleport across the battlefield here and there. They don't really care that much if they're slowed down because they're going to be able to get to where they want to go anyway. And specifically in the Canoptek Court, you can give one Wraith unit, basically infiltrate, so they can infiltrate up the board very quickly, so, Night Spinner doesn't get the chance to actually shoot it and slow it down. And then on top of that, they do have that stratagem to prevent a unit from getting shot. Basically lone operative, right? So if you're running a triple spinner list and your opponent has 3 Wraith units, normally that'd be a great thing because you could slow down each of those units. They're only moving 8 inches. They're not getting to objectives on turn 1. But with the current setup, one of them is infiltrating onto an objective. The other one is not being able to be shot at because of the stratagem. And maybe the third one does get pegged, but doesn't really care too much because it's going to be there by turn 2 anyway. As movement 8 is still pretty good, right? I mean, they still fly. They still have, even with the -2, they have movement 8. Normally they're movement 10. So they're getting to those objectives regardless. And because they have the feel no pain and all that stuff, realistically, Night Spinners are just not effective into them for damage either, even with devastating wounds. Immortal Overwatch is also a huge problem because it sustained hits too, which absolutely shreds Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders with rerolls to hit. And yes, remember that when they're in their power matrix, they are getting rerolls to hit. So they're getting a bunch of sustained hits. Essentially what that means is if an Immortal unit overwatches a Swooping Hawk unit or a Warp Spider unit, that unit is going to be off the board in a matter of seconds, with really no hope of surviving. So your objective ability is severely reduced by an experienced player who can position the Immortals in such a way that, you can't really hop about the board very easily. Now, there is another thing that's really effective against the meta Eldar build, and that is something we saw in the last round of the LVO tournament in Las Vegas, of course, the Las Vegas Open, which was Necrons versus Eldar, and what we saw was the Hypercrypt Legion, who can actually pick up units and put them in reserve. I believe in a Strike Force game, they can pick up to 3 units in their army, put them in reserve at the end of each turn if they want to, end of, your opponent's turn, that is, and come in the next turn via reserves. Which is also another way to get around that Night Spinner spam, right? If you can just pick your units up, put them in reserve, and bring them anywhere on the board, it really doesn't matter if they can't advance or are at -2 movement. And this ability is extremely flexible because it allows you to be defensive if you need to be, but also be able to strike into the enemy's deployment zone and score on secondaries and stuff like that as well. Definitely one of the most powerful detachment bonuses in the entire game for competitive play. Wraiths and Scarabs can also tie up Wraithguard bricks in combat and easily out-trade and out-OC them on objectives. So Wraithguard, they're tanky, there's no doubt about that, but Wraiths are pretty tanky too, and they have better OC. So OC 12 for a unit of Wraiths versus OC 10 for a unit of Wraith Guard. And on top of that, if Scarabs are involved, they're going to reduce the OC of the Wraith Guard by 1. So basically Wraith Guard are OC 0 on objectives. So they're not going to be controlling that objective, and they're going to be stuck in combat pretty much all game. The Monolith is also a very hard target for things like Bright Lances to deal with alone, and the Yinkarn has trouble with it as well, and we actually saw something hilarious happen in the LVO tournament with a Monolith, which I will talk about in just a second. But the Monolith is very powerful. Toughness 13 makes it extremely resilient against things like Warwalkers and, your general Bright Lance toting units. Doomstalkers are also perfect against the Mighty Wraith Brick because they have Strength 14, so they're wounding on 2+, they're AP -3, so they're, basically bringing them down to a 4+ save, and they have damage 3, but on top of that, they have Blast and D6 +1 attacks. They're getting rerolls to hit. If it's heavy, if they stood still, that is, they're getting +1 to hit for that, and they're getting +2 attacks because Wraithguard are usually taken in units of 10. So, in other words, they're doing a hell of a lot of damage against that Wraith Brick for the low costs that they are. So, to basically sum it up, most of the common Necron units and abilities counter the Eldar meta units and builds pretty hard. And there's not really a lot that the Triple Spinner or Yinkarn build can do against it if piloted by an experienced player. So it doesn't matter how good you are as an Eldar player, and I have to say this very clearly, it doesn't matter how good you are as an Eldar player running a meta build like this, you are going to have an extremely tough matchup ahead of you. Alright, but the real question is, how do you deal with this, right? How do you deal with the Canoptek Court and the Necrons as the Eldar? So we can't just give up, right? We can't just say, oh, well, I guess Necrons counter us, we'll just wait till they get nerfed. No, right? We can't do that. That's silly. We have to find a way around them. We have to adapt, and we have to evolve. So I think the most important thing that any player can do is when faced with adversity, they think outside the box, right? We've been used to this meta Eldar build pretty much dominating for a pretty long time now, since September. We need to rethink our strategies and our builds a little bit. And we also need to realize that even though the Triple Spinner is strong, it does have its counters and nerfs are around the corner, so we're going to have to rethink things along the lines anyway, so we might as well start thinking about them now. Now, as for what to actually do in the game itself, screening objectives early with other infiltrators is going to be key. So including infiltrators in your list, things like rangers. I know some people run like 1 unit of rangers, but, maybe consider bringing 2 units or even a unit of striking scorpions, which also have infiltrate and can definitely zone units like Wraiths out early on in the game. Something else you guys need to start thinking about is how to bait out stratagems. So you guys probably are familiar with baiting out Overwatch, but Contemporary Shift is another stratagem that you can bait out early with a 2-pronged attack. So essentially what you do is you make your opponent think that you're going to go for 1 unit of Wraiths when in fact you are going to go for the other. So you bait out that stratagem by shooting one of your units at the unit of Wraiths, and then you end up shooting the rest of your army at the other unit because, you can't target that 1 unit anymore because it is now a lone operative. So then you just switch targets to another unit. Now, this won't always be possible because of line of sight and other factors, like maybe your opponent has some immortals set up to overwatch a lot of your units, things like that, right? But the other thing you could do, of course, is just move your units really close to the Wraiths, like within a couple of inches. And that way, they can't just use reactive subroutines and move right back out of lone operative range, right? So not only does it help you kind of get within range and do damage, but it also allows you to potentially take the objective from your opponent. If your opponent is only left with a couple of models left, you can of course charge into them, wipe them out, or perhaps even just fire and fade onto the objective and erase their power matrix. Also, if you are able to, definitely target and kill the characters with precision weapons. Shroud Runners, Rangers, and Illic Nightspear all have pretty good ranged firepower as far as dealing with the Cryptex. The Cryptex are very fragile. They're only toughness 4. They're, at a 4+ save, and they only have 4 wounds. So there's a good chance that some sniper weapons can take them out. And the units of Wraiths are a lot less durable without that 5+ feel no pain. And at the same time, the Immortals without the Plasmancer are a lot less hard-hitting. So you do want to target those characters. And again, these aren't units you typically see a lot of in Eldar armies as of now with the Eldar meta, right? You don't see people running 2 units of Shroud Runners or 2 units of Rangers, right? You usually maybe see 1 unit of Rangers, maybe 1 Shroud Runner, and sometimes that's just not enough if your opponent's running a ton of characters like this. But what I can tell you is, as the meta evolves, I think units like Shroud Runners and Rangers are going to have a lot more viability in competitive play. Also, like I kind of mentioned before, but baiting Overwatch early is really important for CP mitigation. You don't want to let your opponent just have a bunch of CP that they can use whenever they want. So, sometimes you do have to bait out an Overwatch every once in a while, and moving scoring units in pairs can really help do this. So if you have 2 units of Swooping Hawks or 2 units of Warp Spiders, you can move them in pairs to make sure that, they'll overwatch 1 unit and maybe they kill 1 unit, but that other unit will be able to score on that objective. So that is something else to consider. Sometimes you do have to sacrifice units in order to score points, and that's just a sad fact, right? I know we like preserving our units as much as possible, but against an opponent like Necrons who are going to have that insane amount of overwatch, sometimes you just can't help it, and, you got to kind of just play with the cards you're dealt. But if you move them in pairs, they're not going to be able to prevent you from scoring. Again, they're going to be able to kill a unit of Swooping Hawks or whatever, but they're not going to prevent you from scoring altogether. And lastly, this is some just general advice for playing against Necrons, is prioritize eliminating 1 unit at a time. Necrons are notoriously tanky with their reanimation protocols, and if you leave their units alive for long enough, they will just regenerate over the course of the game, so do make sure that you prioritize killing their units. Don't leave a Wraith unit alive with, 2 Wraiths left or 1 Wraith left or whatever, because chances are there's going to be 2 of them popping back up by the start of your next turn. Especially if your opponent has a Resurrection Orb, and yes, your opponent will definitely bring an Overlord with a Resurrection Orb, so do be aware of that. It is something Necron players bring quite often to games. So, do prioritize eliminating entire units at once. Now, some of the units that are good at tackling the Necrons are Windrider jet bikes. Now, this isn't a unit that's currently good in the meta, but I think they're going to be pretty good going forward because they have shuriken cannons, which are pretty strong, strength 6, damage 2 weapons, so they're pretty effective against Wraiths for the cost once the Cryptek is down. Now, if the Cryptek is alive, they're not so cost effective, Wraiths are getting a 4+ against them, and they're also getting a Feel No Pain, which is going to mitigate a lot of the Shuriken Cannon damage, but once that Feel No Pain's gone, the Wraiths are only getting a 4+, and that's not a great save to have against a Shuriken Cannon. So every 2 wounds it goes through is a dead Wraith, and that's pretty effective. And again, if you take your jet bikes in a larger unit, maybe a unit of 6 with a Warlock or a Farseer, you're going to be able to do some serious damage to them, especially with rerolls to hit, because they are going to be most likely on an objective. Shroud Runners are also great because they pass out lethal hits. Again, putting that on a big unit of Wraiths or something like that can increase your damage against them significantly, especially since they have pretty high toughness, and they can snipe out characters. 3 sniper rifles is technically enough to kill a Cryptek. Will it probably kill a Cryptek? Probably not, unless you're a little bit lucky. But, squad of Rangers and a unit of Shroud Runners should be easily able to deal with a Cryptek. The Avatar of Cain, Wraithlords, and Wraithseers with Fortune will be very tough for Wraiths to deal with. Yes, Wraiths do devastating wounds in combat with a stratagem, but that stratagem is 2 CP, and they need to be within the power matrix. So, which they probably will be, right? Especially if they're contesting an objective with higher OC than a Wraithlord or an Avatar or whatever. But it's important to note that they're not going to be able to kill your unit. And if you're aggressive with the Avatar of Cain or with, your Wraithlords or Wraithseers early on, you can actually pin your opponent off the objective if you're fast enough, especially if you're able to screen them out on the No Man's Land objectives with Rangers and other infiltrators. And, again, these are units, the Avatar, Wraithlord, Wraithseer, are all units that, don't trade particularly well with Wraiths because they have that 4+ invul save and Feel No Pain and stuff. But the Avatar in particular can kill the Cryptek with Epic Challenge. Remember, that is a stratagem to give any character precision attacks in combat. And from that point, the Avatar is just going to slaughter the entire unit. So, without that Feel No Pain, Wraiths are, vulnerable to things like the Avatar of Cain, of course. Wraith Blades can also be very efficient into the Wraiths as well. It is a bit niche, but they can be very strong against them. They fight on death. They, are very durable in combat. Wraiths would need a 5+ normally to wound them, and then a 6+ with Fortune. So they're not really going to be getting a lot of damage through, first of all. And second of all, your Wraith Blades are going to hit them a lot harder, Even the Ghost Swords, which, by the way, the Ghost Swords normally aren't that good. But against Wraiths, they're actually pretty decent. You wound on 4s, but you have a Spirit Seer in the unit. You can get lethal hits, and you hit on 3+. And it's at a decent AP, which will bring them to their invul save. Not to mention, a full unit of Wraith Blades with Ghost Swords will have about 50 attacks. So you are going to be doing some considerable damage. And, if you're lucky, your Spirit Seer might even be able to pick out the Cryptek with Epic Challenge. It's not likely, but, hey, stranger things have happened, right? Lastly, the Death Jester's devastating wounds and sustained hits can deal solid damage and snipe characters as well. So if you push up far enough with the Death Jester, you can actually use precision instead of the normal sustained hits, and the Cryptek is going to be out of there. It's basically an auto kill. It's a guaranteed kill with the Death Jester. You get 3 attacks with the Death Jester. You use Fate's Messenger on the wounds to get those devastating wounds, and it's good game. And from there, of course, you can use whatever to clean up. But do just remember that you want to get within 12 so that they're not going to be able to use that lone operative ability, right? Or, of course, you can just engage them in combat. Now, the last thing I kind of want to do in this video is I do want to address the LVO final between the Hypercrypt Legion and the Aeldari, because I think this is a perfect example of why the Aeldari do so poorly against Necrons. So first of all, I don't mean to say this to take anything away from the Eldar player, because obviously it does require a lot of talent and knowledge of the game to be able to make it to the finals of any grand tournament. Regardless of what type of list you're running, you do need to be a good player to make it to that level. So having said that, there was really nothing that he could have done to prevent this from happening. So what happened was the Necron player, because he went technically second, he was able to pick up 3 of his units at the end of the first Aeldari turn. And essentially one of those units was the Monolith. And he dropped the Monolith with the specific stratagem called Cosmic Precision for 1 command point in the enemy's deployment zone within, well, I should say outside of 3 inches of enemy units. So it's basically like the Inceptor ability that allows them to just, come right outside of 3 inches, and they can't charge, but they can still shoot and, score on secondaries and stuff like that. So that's exactly what he did, except he did it with a Monolith. So the Monolith is one of the biggest units in the Necron book, and it's one of the most powerful units, and he brought it into their deployment zone, wiped out a Night Spinner, and also wiped out a unit of Swooping Hawks, and that was basically game right there. And the reason why I say that is simply because of this, right? Now the Eldar player has a huge threat in their backfield that they not only have to deal with, which is, preventing them from doing other stuff and scoring on other secondaries and stuff like that, but you just lost one of your main pieces, your Night Spinner, which is a lot of damage over the course of the game, and you lost one of your scoring units. And you could tell that did affect him by the end of the game because, he didn't score as many points as he probably should have with the units of Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders that he did have. And really, the list just didn't have the amount of models in it to be able to cover that kind of maneuver, right? It didn't have Rangers out the wazoo that he could just use to basically block off the Monolith from being able to deploy like that, right? He didn't have Guardians that were able to just spread out throughout the backfield to screen that out, right? He didn't have that ability. So therefore, what happened was, he just had to take it. And Eldar players and Eldar armies do not like to just take it. And typically, if that is happening during the first turn of the game, it's going to be a rough game, right? So it was sadly a rough game for the Eldar player, and the Necrons took the tournament. Now, on a side note, I think that targeting a Monolith with that specific stratagem, the Cosmic Precision strat, should be at least 2 CP. Now, I know that may be a little bit of a controversial take, because let's be real here, everybody was rooting against the Aeldari player. My entire group was like, oh my god, I'm so glad the Aeldari lost the tournament. Blah, blah, blah. I'm so glad Necrons won. And I get it, because Aeldari dominance has been there for quite a bit of time, and people are a little bit tired of it at this point. But let's also be realistic here and, just state the obvious. Bringing in a Monolith in the enemy deployment zone within 3 inches in the same way you would bring in Inceptors is a little bit overpowered, right? And that's not even to mention that the Monolith is extremely tough and can also bring other units out of it as if it's a board edge, right? Because obviously, huge dimensional portal, it can bring in units from reserve, right? So it is very strong to do that, and I think it should probably cost more CP than just 1 to actually be able to pull that off. So yeah, that's just my opinion about it. You guys can have your own opinion about whether or not you think that should be nerfed. I think it should be nerfed personally, not because of that game in particular, but I just see so many different situations arising where that would be kind of, very uninteractive for your opponent, just being able to bring in a Monolith in your deployment zone turn 1 and saying, here you go, have fun with that, right? Like most of the things that allow you to bring stuff in turn 1 still have those normal restrictions that the unit has to be outside of 9 inches or, kind of things to that nature. Even the new Dark Angels book, it has a stratagem that allows you to deep strike turn 1, but guess what? You still have to be outside of 9 inches. Right? Which kind of balances it out a little bit because there's more screening potential there. There's more counterplay there. So, that's the last I'll say about that. I expect that interaction to be touched probably or nerfed somehow in the coming months. Maybe not this data slate, but maybe in the next one. But we'll see. Time will tell on that one. But anyway, I think it is cool that Eldar got to the LVO final. Being an Eldar player, I know it was, your kind of standard meta Eldar list that everybody's tired of seeing, the triple spinner list. But, it was cool to see the Eldar in the finals of an over 900 player tournament. So, it was cool. And, to the Eldar player, congratulations for second place. I'm sorry it ended like that for you, man. That's a bum rap. But hey, that's Warhammer. Okay, so in conclusion, the Nuke Necrons play a lot differently than before and have a wide array of tricks up their sleeves that your typical Eldar meta build is going to struggle into. To beat Necrons, we not only have to rethink, what is considered competitively viable in list building, but we also have to play a bit more aggressively and make use of coordinated strikes. So I do have an old video on coordinated strikes. I'm thinking about redoing that video soon. But essentially what it is it's a strategy revolving around the combination of units to be able to pick off key targets. So I will be going into that in a future video, but that's it for today. Have a great week, everybody. I hope to see you guys next time. And thank you so much to my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. For those of you who want to support the channel and help it grow further, I do have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on my channel store page to wrap your local game store, or you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, it does help the channel a little bit, and I will leave those links in the description as well. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. See you guys next time and have some great games this week. Peace out, everybody. See you later.